Hello everyone, how are you tonight?
Hello.
All right, well, it looks like there's only a couple of you here tonight. So again, that will make it go a bit faster because there's less student interactions. Tutorials are supposed to be a bit more interactive than the workshops. So I leave some time for chatting. I'll just share my screen. All right, so we are up to week 4 already. How exciting. Assignments in and ready to move on to the next thing. I like to put the learning outcomes at the beginning of the tutorials so that we can understand what we're doing for the whole week of the module. So these are the learning outcomes. And this week I've got 5 learning theories. So I've tried to not give you too many. And to give you the most relevant ones. So you should be able to describe the main principles of the 5 and compare how different theories explain classroom learning situations. And just as a side note, comparing something is a higher order thinking skill. So when you do get your students to do compare and contrast, they have to have a reasonable understanding of the two things that you want them to compare and contrast. Anyway, for the tutorial, we're going to apply some of the learning theories, but I just am going to focus in on a couple. I'm not going to do all 5 of them during the tutorial. So to get us started, I do have a Menti, if it's going to load. Not loading. I was going to say, if you just want to put in the chat, you can as well, rather than going to the Menti. It looks like the Menti is not going to load for me. All right, can't even see what the question was. The question was, type a few short words or phrases. What helped you finally understand something that was difficult? So what was something that really helped you to understand a concept that was difficult? Type something in the chat because the Menti is not working. So it might have been something like practicing or seeing some clear examples, or I don't know, making a mind map, drawing a picture. Any of those sorts of things resonate with anyone? Asking questions, yep. Getting clarification, that's a good one. Repetition, yep. Practicing. All right, okay, let's move on then. So you might recognize this picture from when we did the information processing theory, and I said that we would be revisiting it again. The first theory that I'm going to talk about is called cognitivism. It's very hard to say, cognitivism. Still didn't get it. All right. And it's related to the information processing theory. Okay, so it sees learning as an internal process in your mind. So you're receiving the information, organizing it, and storing it. So that's a bit of a recap from module 2, and hopefully you can remember that from back there. I'm going to give you a quick analogy. And an analogy is a learning strategy that helps us understand new information by connecting it to something that we already know. And sometimes we give the learners we ask them to make an analogy, and it can be really hard if you don't know both things really well. I can remember, you might remember also in science when you learned about the cell, maybe your teacher said, pretend the cell is like a city. What are the organelles? How are they the same as things that are in the city? So sometimes as a teacher, you might use analogies to help your student understand two very different things. So if we think of this as a computer, so our brain is a computer, and we have inputs like the keyboard and the mouse and the camera. We have a short-term working space, that's your screen, and you're going to be typing in there. And then you have a long-term hard drive, okay, where you save it. So that's like the sensory memory is the inputs, and then the working memory is like the screen, and then the long-term memory is like the hard drive. Usually with analogies, they won't exactly match up. And in humans, the short-term space, the working memory, is much shorter than the computer, okay? It's only going to hold information and manipulate new information for just a few seconds. So that would be really frustrating if we were typing and it only stayed on the page for a few seconds and then it disappeared. And we want to move that information into long-term memory, and we use a thing called schemas. So schemas are mental frameworks that help us understand and remember things later. So the big limitation in this whole situation here is working memory. We can only juggle 4 or 5, 6 things fairly comfortably. Some people are a bit exceptional and can do 9 things. But mostly if you get overloaded, you don't have enough spaces in there, and those other things are just going to fall to the side. So our job as teachers is to reduce any unnecessary load and help them to connect new ideas to existing schemas so that the information transfers successfully into long-term memory. We'll see if the next one is going to work. Awesome. All right, I'll put the link in there, and this is a little retrieval practice. So I've told you some information and now I'm doing a little retrieval to see if you remember it. Which part of the learning process is most limiting? Okay, and I've just put the number in there if you prefer to do that on your phone. Don't forget, locking in an answer is better for your brain than sitting on the fence. So if you sit on the fence and wait for me to show you the answer, it's less likely to stay in your brain than if you answer it and get it wrong. Okay, let's have a look. And the answer is working memory. Very good. All right, so I don't actually want you to click on that, but I did include it in the slides in case you wanted to go and have a look at it. I'm going to do a short-term memory or working memory test on you, okay? So what's going to happen is when I press start test, it's going to show you some letters, and then you have to remember the letters without writing them down. And then after it goes off, I want you to type the answer into the chat. Okay, so are you ready? All right, so now type them in the chat. What do you remember? Yeah. Anyone else? Is that what everyone got? All right, are you ready for the next one? Don't write them down yet, just memorizing them. Okay, write them down. Yep. All right, you ready for the next one? Gonna get a bit harder now. Okay, what did that one say? Yep. Did you use any strategies to help you remember all 6 of those? Like what was your decision making like? What did you decide to do? How did you approach that? Did you just remember 6 in a row without any strategy? Repeating them? Yep, over and over until, yep. Did anyone try any chunking? So remembering 3 and then 3, or 2, 2 and 2 to try and
I
make it a bit smaller?
I tried to remember the first two, and then I just kind of made a name of the other four, so that'll be easier for me to remember.
Yeah, okay, so that's a strategy, okay? You made a little name so that you could remember it. All right, ready for the next one? All right, what did that one say? Close, close, not quite, not quite. It was AVCYISEH, because I did write it down so, so that I could check your answers. All right, are you ready? What about that one? Did anyone get that one? No? Yeah, that's about how far I got with it as well, about 5 in. All right, the last one. This one's super hard. Get ready. Anything? That one was super hard. I don't even feel like I finished reading that one before before it was done. Anyway, so the point there is it's very hard for us to hold all of that information in our head, especially when they're very disconnected like that. So those letters didn't have any relationship to each other. And so it was really hard. And when novice learners are learning, all of the information doesn't have any connection to each other. They're just individual dots of information with no connection. So we need to help them build these things called schema. So that's the building blocks of our knowledge, and we want to draw on students' prior knowledge. Sometimes we need to make explicit connections, because sometimes no matter how well you design a learning journey, they don't make a connection. Okay, you've designed it as an expert, and they're coming in as novices, and to you the learning journey is clear, and it seems like when they get to this point they're going to go, oh, I get it, and then they don't. Okay, because they didn't make that little connection that you thought that they would make. And chunking is a thing that we can use. So if we group things together, we can remember them for longer. And when we have these schema, we get automaticity. There's too many big words in this. It's automatic. So once we have that schema, it's automatic for us. So experts have this network of knowledge that they pull into the working memory rather than all of these little individual specks of knowledge that fill up all the slots. So if you look at the picture I've chosen there, you can see that it goes through the information processing theory model. So we've got the sensory at the beginning. We sense something, see it, touch it, hear it, smell it. Then we pay attention to it. So one thing has caught our attention, and it's a dog in this case. And then from the working memory, from the long-term memory, we pull all the things we know about dogs into our working memory. And we might know heaps of things about dogs, okay? But because it's a network, we can pull it into the working memory. So that's the difference between a novice learner and an expert learner. And those two terms are not related to developmental age, okay? So you could have a child that's an expert on fractions teaching an adult how to do fractions, okay? If the adult doesn't have any schema about fractions, then they are a novice and the child is an expert, okay? So those are different things. All right, so have a go at this one. Rank the strategies. So these are study strategies that from most effective to least effective for moving something from working memory into long-term memory. I see someone else is here, so I'm just going to put the link in the chat again, because you might not be able to see the chat that happened before you got here. All right, let's have a look and we'll talk about it. And you can feel free to weigh in while I'm chatting about it. I agree that linking new ideas to what we already know is going to be the most effective, and we would call that a deeper processing strategy. Okay, we're trying to have a more deep understanding of the thing rather than just remember it. Repeating information several times to memorize it is a good way. It's rote learning. In the old days, we used to use that a lot for cramming for an exam. It's a really bad strategy because as soon as the exam's over, you forget everything. So think back, how many of those sequences of letters can you remember now? Probably the first one, because it was super easy and made a word. So not a super good one for getting things into long-term memory. The rereading and listening again, it's about on par with the repeating things. It's the same kind of thing. The drawback there that I've mentioned before is that because you're rereading or re-watching something in context, it feels like you understand it. So you may get an illusion of comprehension. Okay, you think, yes, that is absolutely correct, and I understand that completely. It makes total sense. And then as soon as you put the book down and try to explain it to somebody else, it doesn't make sense. You don't actually understand all the bits. And multitasking is not actually a thing. Your brain is a serial processor. which means it can only process one thing at a time. So you might be able to switch attention quite quickly between things, but you can only process one thing at a time. So if you're trying to do deep processing, like you're working on your homework or something like that, and you're maybe, I don't know, watching TV out the corner of your eye, you can switch between those two things, but coming back to the deep work is much more difficult. And there's been a number of studies that show it can take, 20 minutes to get back into it again. If you're doing two things that are both equally shallow, like sitting and watching the television and scrolling on your phone at the same time, it feels like you're doing them both at the same time because you are able to switch attention between those things pretty quickly. You don't need to get back into it. It's just they're both equally superficial. So just to sort of summarize that, there's surface processing versus deep processing. Surface processing is where we're just trying to remember it. We're not really trying to understand it. And things like rote learning and rereading and highlighting, they're only ever going to give you surface processing. And when we talk about blooms next week, you'll be at the bottom of the pyramid. So a thing that can happen in schools is, depending on the type of assessment that you do, and even at university, this is true in the field that I've just come from. If you ask a lot of questions in the testing that are at that superficial level, then it encourages the students to just do that kind of work. Whereas if you ask questions that are higher up the pyramid, more higher order thinking questions, it encourages students to process a bit deeper. So the deeper processing is going to help the learning become more durable. And this is another place where group work, I mean, I am a big fan of group work. I used to think that I wasn't really, but over the years that I've been teaching, I actually think group work is very helpful and very useful. If you can explain it to somebody else, or if you hear somebody else explain it a different way, both of those things can be really helpful. So I am actually a big fan. All right, so moving on from cognitivism to cognitive load theory, because we want to look at the working memory. There was a guy called John Sweller, who's an Australian educational psychologist, and he wanted to know why students sometimes still fail to learn something even when the material is well designed. And the answer he found was in the limits of the working memory. So we can hold a set number of things in there, and we call the things that we're holding in there cognitive load. And we can break cognitive load down into 3 different types. The purple one is intrinsic load. So that's the natural complexity of the subject itself. So, for example, adding fractions is intrinsically harder than adding whole numbers. Okay, so we can't remove the difficulty of that task, that knowledge. We try to manage that by sequencing from simple to complex. Okay, so that your brain has time to make a schema to hold in the working memory, and then we can add a little bit more information, and then schema gets a little bit better developed, and we can hold it a little bit more in our working memory. So we can't reduce that, we can only manage it. Then we have extraneous load, which is avoidable noise. So if you give unclear instructions, or if you use irrelevant visuals or cluttered slides, that's the kind of load we can control. And you will have noticed, given that it's week 4, that my slides are very basic. They're very plain. There's maybe a picture, a little bit of writing, because I'm trying to reduce extraneous load. Including a good picture and making it multimodal is okay, but they have to be related to each other. So if your learner is looking at the picture thinking, oh, I wonder how that's related to this text, or oh, look at what those people are doing in that picture there, they're not listening, okay? Their attention is on the wrong thing. And then we have germane load, and that's the good kind of effort that actually helps build a schema. So learning is effortful. You can't, as much as we want, we can't absorb it just by looking at it or listening to it. We can't open the kid's brain and tip it in, okay? It's effortful. And germane load is the effort. So it's the thinking time, the analyzing, the connecting, the practicing. So it's the kind of activities that we get the students to do. Okay, so we want to reduce extraneous, manage intrinsic, and maximize germane. Okay, we want them to do that cognitive work efficiently. All right, so we've got a question. A teacher gives 5 complex verbal instructions at once before students start an activity. What kind of cognitive load is this likely to create? Let's press that again. All right, let's have a look. Okay, that answer is extraneous because it's the instructions don't make sense. So they're making it harder to get started because they've got to process the instructions. So whenever students look puzzled before they even start, your extraneous load is too high. Now, I'm just going to talk about extrinsic for a second. Extrinsic in this question was a red herring because when we talk about motivation, we talk about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. But when we talk about cognitive load, we talk about intrinsic and extraneous cognitive load. All right. Suggest a change to reduce the extraneous load of the activity that we were going to do. So what would we do instead? Have a look. Imagine the guesses the kids would come up with. That would be entertaining. All right, so simplify instructions and model each step visually. I just have a cautionary tale about that, which I've told in every tutorial, so I'll tell it to you. I was a science teacher at high school and also at university, and I did this. Okay, so I'm giving practicals. Students are coming and they're doing a practical in the lab. They have instructions, very clear, simple instructions. You know, one or two lines per dot point. And I model the whole thing at the front of the room, pick up this test tube, pour that stuff in, mix it, all of that stuff. And I still had students that would ask me what they had to do next. So there's still, even without, no matter how much you try, there's still sometimes where there's an illusion of comprehension. So they watched me do it, they thought they understood, but they didn't write any notes down. And then when I stopped doing it, they forgot. They forgot what they had to do. Okay, so even when you do that, sometimes it doesn't work. So, but that is still the best answer. And I still do that every time. All right, so here's some examples of ways that we can reduce the cognitive load. So when you go back and look at the slides later, these are color coded from that other slide. I'll just go back and show you this one. See, germane was green and intrinsic was purple, extraneous was orange. So if we give a clear structure and remove distractions, that's going to remove extraneous load. If we do chunking, that's going to help manage the intrinsic load. So we chunk it we teach them how to do chunking. We might provide things like scaffolded, what am I trying to say? Visual organizers and stuff like that, that will help them break it down into smaller, more manageable pieces. And we're going to progressively reveal the information. So we're not going to throw the whole thing at them at once. We're going to say, you know, first do this and this and this, and we're going to try to link it wherever possible to real world examples of what they could see in the real world. The blue one here is a little extra one. And when we talk about UDL next week or the week after, Universal Design for Learning, they will talk about multimodal delivery, and that is where we use multimedia wisely. So it's not wrong to have pictures and other things in there, but we want to keep them related to each other. So not distracting, but related. All right, so we had the case study in the workshop with Yuki's class looking at the fractions. The teacher gives them a set of instructions and asks them to experiment with the paper circles to compare halves, quarters, and eighths. Some students jump ahead and others get lost. Which of the cognitive loads is overwhelming the students in this one? Is it extraneous, intrinsic, or germane that they're being overwhelmed by?
I think
A
it's
real
intrinsic.
classroom. I would accept intrinsic if you tell me why you think it's intrinsic.
Damn it. Well, because like, for example, it's the complexity of the task. So
Yes.
if they're given this set of instructions, they sort of have to understand those instructions, all of them at the same time, as well as how to complete the task. So that's sort of where my mind was going.
Yes. What you described there was extraneous though. So it's the complexity
Ah,
of the task. But I would have accepted intrinsic if you said something like fractions are hard and they haven't had any modeling of fractions beforehand or something like that. Do you
okay,
see what
yeah,
I'm saying?
yes, I do. Now I completely get what that means. And I will
Yeah.
say separately that fractions are hard. So,
Yes, they are. Awesome. There's a question in there, a real classroom example of multimedia. Can I come back to that in a couple of weeks when I do the UDL thing? Because
yeah, sure.
it's just about the things, the kinds of things that I've been doing in the content for you guys, where I tell you a thing and then, you know, I might use a picture to illustrate the thing. And I can't give you a classroom one off the top of my head, but when I was teaching, before I came to this university, I was teaching bioscience, anatomy and physiology to nursing students who are not scientists. Okay, so nursing students are nurturing people who want to take care of people. They don't necessarily want to know all of the ins and outs of science while they do it. So that is a very, very high cognitive load for them and a very intrinsically difficult task. So I used a lot of diagrams in that to explain concepts because it's better to see it as I explain it than for me to just go blah, 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 blah. Okay, so if something is easier with a diagram, definitely use a diagram. I'm not saying never use diagrams. So multimodal, which is what I'm talking about with UDL, means using images and auditory things and, you know, writing things, not in a learning styles way, because learning styles have actually been debunked. That's a neuro myth that people have learning styles. but multimodal, so the same information coming in two different forms can help students learn it better. Okay, students have unclear base level understanding of fractions would be lost to find the connections. Yes, that's right. That's right. That would be an intrinsic problem. You need to scaffold that a little bit better to reduce the intrinsic load. That's correct. In this one, the example focuses more on the set of instructions. So I think the example wants you to say extraneous, but equally there is an intrinsic load with most new things. Okay, I'm going to go past that. All right, so hopefully I've made a nice learning journey where you can see a path I've laid down from cognitivism, which is how we process the information. So this is about moving things from working memory to long-term memory. And if you link that back to what we did right at the very start, where we talked about how the brain actually makes connections between the neurons, okay, that's what's happening in cognitivism. We're processing that information. We want to design our learning so we're not overloading the mental limits. And then when we're moving things into long-term memory, we're making more connections between other information we already had there. So constructivism is about the process that students have to think about it in order for the neurons to talk to each other in order to make the connections. Okay, so that's what constructivism means. Students must construct their own knowledge. That's why it's called constructivism. So that's how we build meaning. Now, what I want to talk about now is that you might come across web pages and things, and even some journal articles that talk about constructivist teaching approaches, okay, where you want the students to develop their own understanding of something, okay? So the aim is good, but the way that you do it sometimes is not good, okay? So this is why websites are not good sources for your essays. So I've got this table here. If we look at constructivism, the theory, it's describing how learners build understanding by connecting experiences, okay, and making schema. And it focuses on that internal process that the students are doing when they're thinking about stuff. They have to actively think about it and interpret it to learn it. Learning is personally constructed. I can't just put it in there as much as I want to. And this theory helps explain why things like active learning work, okay? Because when the kids are actively learning, they're thinking about it and doing the work. When I was teaching in high school, there was a catchphrase, hands on, minds on, and I mentioned before in another tutorial, I'm not sure if it was yours, hands on doesn't always equal minds on. You want it to, but sometimes I would give them tasks to do and their hands would be doing it, but their minds would be talking about what they're doing on the weekend. Okay, so that's not active learning as much as I wanted it to be. So when active learning is properly designed and it's working, that's what it is. They're thinking about what they're doing. Constructivist teaching approaches is the way that you design these constructive learning activities. The problem comes when you say it's discovery learning and I want them to discover all these things that, you know, scientists discovered all on their own. Scientists had a schema. Scientists had experiences and things that these students do not have. There is no way that those students can discover those things on their own. You need to model it, scaffold it, ask leading questions, and sometimes you even need to make the connection for them. Sometimes they can't do it. But when you do explicit guidance, then this sort of discovery thing is good. It's really good. But you just need to have schema in order to succeed. Okay, so sometimes they're throwing classes into problems or topics that they don't have any idea about and they don't know where to start. Intrinsic loads too high, extraneous loads too high, germane loads under the ground somewhere because they've got no idea what they're doing. So there's lots of studies that show it doesn't work unless they have the schema. And there's a reading that I've put in there. There's one from Sweller and one from Allen, which it described it really well. And there's a lot of the documentation these days is going away from the discovery learning. So on the Australian education website and stuff like that, they're discouraging pure discovery learning and they want you to do explicit instruction with direct instruction. Okay, they want you to tell the students what they need to know. So this is down here. If they're novices, which means they don't have schema, then they're going to need a larger amount of guidance. And if they're experts, they're more independent and you can give them more difficult problems. So once you've got the schema, you can definitely go into more discovery things. Yeah. It's you'll get the hang, Amy. You'll get the hang. It's my favorite part of the whole thing is designing these learning journeys for the students to go through. So it always crushed my soul when the students would not engage and just be naughty. But anyway, that's for another day. Okay, which statement best describes constructivism as a learning theory? So which one of these is the definition of constructivism? Let's have a look. Yes, that is the right one. All right, so I think we already went through what went wrong in Yuki's class. We could have maybe just did one fraction at a time. We could have, made sure that instructions were simple and modeled, just so that we weren't overloading them. And then it might be a truly constructive activity where they do play with things actively and think about them as they're doing it and go, oh, I see, 2/4 makes a half. It's the same. And things like that. All right, so that's the learning outcomes that I always like to put up at the end so that I remind you when you get to the end of the module, make sure you have a look back at the learning outcomes and make sure you can do all of those things, even though we don't have an exam anymore. All right. Does anyone want to tell me things about their exciting teaching journey or ask me any questions about any of the things that we've covered? Obviously, I didn't cover everything that's in the module. I'm supposed to try to focus on one thing and go a bit deeper when we do the tutorials. But I'm happy to answer questions about any of the other stuff. Amy?
I was going through the module 4 and I was reading about Skinner, and I obviously know about him already from my previous studies, but I wanted to discuss the negative reinforcement and the punishment side of Skinner.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in this day and age. Like obviously punishment isn't, not like mean punishment, but it's still a form of punishment. And you know, my center director, she has been putting me through these kindergarten meetings with a lot of other teachers. And obviously, I'm hoping I'm going to progress to primary school. And although I really do gravitate towards the positive reinforcement side of his theory, because from my personal experience, especially with younger children, they like the stickers and the positive, feedback. It really does work with the praise.
Yes, it
But
does. Yeah.
but I'm not allowed to do any kind of
Punishment.
punishment, and that
Yeah.
includes saying the word no.
Oh, okay.
So
That's
we're
different.
not even allowed to say no in kindergarten. And it's really challenging because the children, their behaviors are escalating because there's
Yes, I
no
know.
ability to discipline in a safe way. So I wanted to
Yeah.
get your thoughts on what would that look like now if we were able to apply that model? How could I adapt that?
That's tough. I don't know. I'm fully on board with no.
Me too. Oh, yeah.
Mm. I just want to make one little clarification though. Negative
Mm.
reinforcement is not the same as punishment. So
No, I know
negative
they're different.
reinforce,
No, yeah, yeah. Go
yeah,
on, go
so
on.
they're both reinforcements, okay? So they're
Yes.
both rewards.
Yes.
Negative and positive reinforcement are both rewards. One
Mm-hmm.
is adding something like a sticker,
Yeah.
and the other is taking away something negative. So
Yeah.
adding a positive or taking away a negative. So if you were going to say everybody has to, well, something they didn't want to do. So maybe normally you have to pick up papers or something. If you do the thing, you don't have to pick up the papers. That would
Right.
be
Okay.
negative reinforcement.
Right.
So it's taking away something they didn't want to do.
Right. Okay. So
Yeah.
that could definitely
I know
work
it's
because,
very, yeah, maybe.
mm,
If it's a thing that they didn't want to do. But yeah, that does make it really hard. And I was reading a thing the other day about, and I'm sort of a little bit on board with this one about you can't say good. You can't say good in the kindergarten classroom anymore. You can't say good work
yeah,
or
you're not
good
meant
boy.
to because it
Yeah,
makes the other children feel like they are inadequate.
well, also it's just priming them for praise seeking,
Yeah.
ex it's giving them extrinsic motivation, and you're trying to encourage
Excuse me, ma'am.
intrinsic
I have
motivation.
I have a question for this statement. Like if
Yep.
some student is like do good progress and then they like get so much like do work very hard and then the teacher said like, okay, you are very good student in the class. Then still I don't need to say anything like you are good student or bad.
No, you should praise their effort instead of their goodness, apparently. This is the way that we're going now. So in order for them to not seek out praise, we encourage them to internalize the feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So we say that it was, you praise their effort. You worked very hard on that. I see that you
Yeah.
worked very hard on that, rather than you did a good job. So rather than a judgment, you are just acknowledging that they worked very hard on that. I
Okay,
know
I
it's
got it.
really tricky. It's very
Yes,
tricky.
yes. Yeah.
Do you guys do any more psychology with the little kids in any of your other subjects? No, just me?
I don't, no, not me. We touch on little things, obviously, that they can grasp at that age,
Mm,
especially when something occurs. So if something occurs that will stem the learning, like
mm.
behavioral or that sort of thing. But again, we're asked to keep the program and the curriculum very neutral and
Yes,
to leave out a lot of opinions and theories because we don't want to impose our opinions on them, which I find
yes,
really contradictive because when they go into primary school, it's the complete opposite. So it's not really setting them up for school readiness because they're sort
yeah,
of you know, and I don't like using this word, but it's how I feel. They're groomed in a certain way to act and, you know, have, you know, free speech and child-led and all of these things. And then they go into a classroom and then they're, you know, reprimanded for speaking out or and not being able to sit during, you know, group time and they don't understand it. And it's a real
Yeah,
struggle
for
I
sure.
have, the gap. I really do.
Yeah, for sure. I don't really know very much about early childhood because I've only ever done high school. So
No, that's okay. Good choice.
I don't know that it is. High school kids are pretty scary. And I think just as naughty, especially these days, from what I hear. All right, I don't have any more to tell you. I don't have any more slides or anything like that, but I have uploaded these slides. I realized earlier I hadn't done it yet, but they're there now.
Ma'am, have you marked that the last assessment or still is going?
There's 700 people in this subject, so I've got a team of markers and they're working very hard to get it done. And the planned date of release of the feedback is next Monday morning.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
No worries.
And next, I think, is the 5th of December, next case study assessment.
Yes, that's right. So you've got the case study assessment coming up on the 5th.
Okay.
It's probably not as related to this week's content. It's probably more related to the following 2 weeks. It looks more at well-being and social stuff. So I
Okay.
guess bring questions to the workshop because Reb is in the workshop and she has been a marker in this subject before, and that's why we've got her in the workshop, so that if you have any questions about the assessments, then she can help answer them. I only just started about, I don't know, a month ago, just before this subject started.
So
I
there is
started.
no theories in second assessment?
There are lots of theories all the time. This is a theory subject.
Okay. All right.
There's a fair bit about UDL, Universal Design for Learning. So that's a good thing to include in your second assessment because that's about designing inclusively for everybody. So,
Yes. Thank you so much.
all right. I'll let you all go then. If you haven't got any questions, if you think of something later, just put it in the chat and either Reb or I will answer it over there. And I'll see you next week.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.